And are we ready to start the meeting? No, we are live. All right. Welcome, everyone. I, Councilmember Tola Martz, call the June 22nd, 2022 City Council Services, Safety, and Parks Committee to order, the first Services, Safety, and Parks Committee meeting since we have reconstituted subcommittees. So it's very exciting. Councilmember DeMichelle will be participating remotely. This is Councilmember Ray to my right. Couple of points about the meeting. Public comment. There are multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. There's going to be a general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, or you can make comments for each of the three topics that we have this evening. You can make comments after the presentation and council question and answer period, but before we deliberate on those issues. In each of these situations, I'm going to offer folks up to 5 minutes to make their comments, both for the comments at the beginning and during individual issues. Members of the public may address council at this time in person or virtually. Those who signed up in advance to make comments will be called on first. If you are joining us virtually and would like to make comments, please raise your virtual hand. The way you do that is, if you're on the phone, press *3. If you've joined by computer or smartphone, look for a hand icon. This varies by device. One option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right-hand corner. If you're in the room and did not sign up, I will ask for other speakers before closing this portion of the meeting. I will wait for a moment to see if anyone wishes to raise their hand. Clerk, has anyone signed up to speak or indicated a desire to speak this evening?
Yes, Councilmember Martz.
Thank you. Citizen comments are an important part of the public process. We take them seriously and factor them into the decisions we make. Please direct comments to the whole council and not individuals. While this is not a question and answer session, we will contact you to follow up if needed. When recognized, unmute your microphone if you're remote, or step up to the lectern if you're physically here. State your name, address, and relationship to the city. Speak clearly and pause frequently. Limit comments to 5 minutes. If you are attending virtually and do not respond after your name or phone number is called, or if your connection is lost unexpectedly, the meeting will need to proceed. You are encouraged to rejoin the meeting if able. Personal attacks, obscene language, derogatory remarks, and disruptive behavior will not be permitted. Clerks, can you identify the first person who has signed up to speak?
Yes, Councilmember Martz. The first person signed up to speak is Kay Font.
And that's virtual?
No, that's in the room.
Oh, Kay, if you want to come up to the lectern? Or not? Huh. I believe Kay Font is not in the room. All right. Has anyone else signed up?
Yes. Doug Schlepp.
Doug is referring to the next person on the list. Who's next?
We have no more people signed up on the sign-in sheet, and we have a couple of virtual attendees.
Before we go virtual, Doug, did you want to speak to us or not? Or are you going to speak at the individual? You're gonna wait till we get to the third topic. Okay, thank you. So virtually.
Among our virtual attendees, Councilmember Martz, I do not see any virtual hands raised at this time.
We'll ask again. Now would be the time to indicate, both here in the room and virtually, if you wish to speak now. And again, this doesn't preclude you from speaking on the individual issues that we have 3 topics this evening. Closing it out. Still no indication?
No virtual hands.
All right. Then we will move on to our topics. First up this evening on our agenda is ID 1088, Board and Commission Consolidation. This is going to be presented by City Clerk Gieser.
Hi, Chair Martz and committee members. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me just share my screen. Give me just a minute here. Tim Smith, our media production specialist, will also be presenting with me tonight in just a few moments. Okay, so I am here to talk to you about one of the city's 2022 work plan items, which is to evaluate the effectiveness and portfolio of the city's boards and commissions. Tonight we have 3 questions to ask for the committee's recommendation on. The first is regarding some action we are ready to take to sunset the Cable TV Commission. The second is whether to pursue sort of an evaluation by the cemetery board of some possible opportunities for consolidation or a sunset or a change of scope to the cemetery board. And our third question is just whether there's any other advisory boards that the committee thinks are worth looking into more closely in the year ahead. So the city currently has 14 advisory boards covering a very wide range of topics. They provide very valuable input and expertise to the city council and to the mayor. When all of the boards and commission seats are filled, it constitutes 130 volunteers in our community, which I think is pretty amazing. Also, staff. We have a dedicated staff person for each of these 14 advisory boards. One of their key responsibilities is to caretake, support, train, and provide work plan items to these advisory boards. So over the years, there have been changes to the city's advisory boards that really reflect, I think, the sort of the development of the community and the issues in the community. So this slide shows you some of the changes that have been made in the last 6 years. So we've let go of some boards that have served their primary purpose. And we've also created some new boards that cover some issues that are very important to our community, like transportation, equity, and the environment. So as part of this change, that's why we're here tonight. Just we've sort of looked at the portfolio of the city's current boards and commissions and identified one board that we think has served its primary purpose and another board that we think is worth revisiting in 2022. With that, I'm going to ask Tim Smith to come up and cover the next few slides.
Evening, council members. Tim Smith, Media Production Specialist for the City of Issaquah, and also the Staff Liaison for the Cable TV Commission. So I'm going to start out with a little background for the Cable TV Commission. Starting in 1980, the City of Issaquah formed the Cable TV Commission to negotiate and regulate cable TV franchises with cable providers in Issaquah. This authority included cable TV franchise negotiations, implementation, technical review of cable systems, the resolution of resident complaints by working with the cable TV companies through negotiation and imposing fines. In 1991, the Cable TV Commission started the government access TV station we all know as ICTV, Channel 21. They ran and operated that from 1991 until 1999, when they hired an independent contractor to come in, take over running it, and upgrade the systems at that point. In 1996, the Telecommunication Act was passed by the federal government. This changed local regulatory authority to a certain extent. With the Telecommunication Act of 1996, the FCC federalized much of the local regulatory authority that municipalities once held over cable providers. In 2001, the city hired a full-time cable operator to run its government access channel and that reported directly to the Cable TV Commission concerning channel operations, content, and franchise issues. So to kind of review what their initial purview was. So negotiating cable franchises and overseeing it on a day-to-day basis. Also technical reviews, so they would meet with cable, and they still do, they would meet annually with all cable providers. They would get cable plants, they would review the cable systems, they could do a technical audit if it was required, and then they would resolve residents' complaints. So over the years, the role has changed for the Cable TV Commission. And starting, as I said previously, the FCC regulations changed, and it really reduced it down to mostly concerning with right-of-way issues and customer service levels. Secondly, technology advances have changed the need for cable over the years. In 1980, if you lived in Issaquah and you lived on Squawk Mountain, you really needed cable, and you really needed it on the floor. The topography made it really, really important to have a strong regulatory board. But as technology has advanced and people have cable cut, and you can get media in different ways where you were just stuck with your cable company back in the day. Now you have other options. Also, increased staff support. So city staff now operates ICTV and handles all programming and media production decisions. Also, the city staff handles all day-to-day cable customer complaints. So previously, a cable complaint would come in, it would come to the staff liaison. The liaison would contact the Cable TV Commission, and the commission would decide a path of resolution. Now it comes into the staff, and staff deals with it directly, has a relationship with all cable providers, has contacts there, and gets resolution. And then those resolutions are reported back to the Cable TV Commission. Unless it's a systemic issue that rises to a major level, then it would go to the Cable TV Commission directly. We haven't had a situation like that in over a decade. And then last but certainly not least, there's a decreased public interest in serving on the CTC. So right now we have 2 members on the CTC. We can't even do a quorum. The CTC cannot meet. At the beginning of the CTC, there was 9 members, 7 regular, 2 alternates. As interest waned in 2015, we lowered that number to 5 and 2 and lowered the meetings from monthly to as needed. So that brings me to the recommendation. The final 2 CTC members, after discussing this, agree with this, is to adopt an ordinance sunsetting the CTC and delegating existing duties and responsibilities to staff, the mayor, and city council. And I'm open to any questions.
Councilmember Ray, you have a quizzical look on your face.
I do, and I have some questions. Thanks, Tim. That was really interesting. I think you touched on this, but what is the view of the 2 members that we have on the commission today of the future of the commission? Do they see a role? Do they want to evolve the role? Is there somewhere to grow it, something to do with it? What's their take on it?
Currently, their opinion is that it's time to sunset the commission. There was a time back in 2014, 2015, the commission created a white paper, and one of the options was to expand the board into a technology board and lower their role, lower the cable role, and then the other option was to decrease, and or eliminate. This was back in 2015, and so it landed on the decrease. So I think that time has passed, especially because of the lack of the interest in the board currently.
Just 2 follow-up questions. When's the last time the board met?
August 6th of 2020.
Okay, and have there been any need for the board to deal with customer service or complaint issues in the last couple of years?
No, I mean, the main issue that we had during COVID was internet. And the Cable TV Commission does not regulate the internet. We cannot regulate the internet. Now, we reached out directly to Comcast during that time, and we worked with them. City staff worked with them, and they were fairly responsive. It was a long haul. I don't know if you remember, but it was tough. We had some areas in Squawk and Montreux that had a really hard time, but we worked with Comcast and the cable providers and got it fixed. But the Cable TV Commission was not involved in that process at all.
All right, so you just said something interesting. So it's not cable per se, it's cable television?
It's cable television, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember DeMichelle, did you have any questions before we move to the next facet of this presentation?
I do have a question, if that's okay. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay. Tim, last night, at last night's council meeting, we did have some testimony, and which I appreciated very much. But the commentator said that there are places around the country that are losing their cable TV stations, and that we needed to keep an eye on that. So my question for you is, has there been any indication at all that in the area or in your knowledge of communities losing their cable TV stations?
Not that I know of. All the local cities all still have their cable channels. They haven't removed them. And to be honest, we are the only city in our area that has a cable TV commission that I have knowledge of. So. But yes, but there is no threat of losing channels that I've noticed locally at all.
Thank you very much.
Did you have a follow-on question?
No, I did not. Thank you.
And I think City Administrator would like to add a comment.
Yes, thank you, Committee Chair, members of the committee. A little bit more information from my experience. What some communities are finding is that their local government access channels currently are on good channels. They are low in the spectrum, and what some cable providers are doing is you move from 21 to 2021. And so there have been communities that have been concerned that, yes, the channel continues to exist, but it's extraordinarily hard to find. So I would think that, again, as Tim has said, the technology has kind of changed. I think it's less of an issue, but certainly a few years ago, communities were losing their position. And again, many communities also used the cable company at one point for studio facilities, for technical support. All that has gone away throughout the country. So again, as Tim has mentioned, we're in, I think, a very good spot to continue video programming. And I think the administration's feeling is that with dedicated staff, good equipment, part-time staff as needed for the production of video, because certainly not only do we do the meetings, we do things with social media. I think that's all very right and appropriate. But when there are customer complaints, staff has those connections that really are separate and apart from the commission. So that's why we're here this evening recommending that we sunset the commission.
Thank you, State Administrator Bob Klitz. So there are 3 parts to this ID, and we're going to continue on with the presentation and questions. And again, we will take public comment when we transition from presentations and Q&A into deliberation.
Thank you for your time.
And I just have a few more quick slides here that I'll move through. So as I mentioned, the other board that we would like to take a look at in the coming months is the cemetery board. We have not done the thorough background and research that Tim just shared with you on the Cable TV Commission. But we do feel that because of our robust park board and our robust parks department, that it's worth evaluating whether the cemetery board could somehow be consolidated. I think at a minimum, it's a healthy thing to look at the scope of any board. It looks as if the cemetery board's scope was last revised in 1983. So what we are proposing is that the cemetery board be tasked with looking into their role more specifically, sort of reviewing their current scope to see if it's actually what they are doing in practice, and whether having a dedicated cemetery board is indeed still critical. This board is also having some recruitment challenges. It has over time and is currently. So again, that is our recommendation. We would be returning, let me move to the next slide here. We're proposing that the cemetery board take the rest of 2022 to sort of carry out some research and evaluation, provide a recommendation to the mayor, and we would be bringing that recommendation to this committee in early 2023 prior to the annual recruitment of the boards and commissions. And then the third part of our question to you tonight was just whether there were other areas that the committee felt the administration should be taking a closer look at. This is just a visual display of our other boards and commissions that are currently serving.
Thank you, and I'll ask if any of my fellow council members have questions at this point. Yeah, Councilmember Ray.
Thanks, Chair Martz. What does the cemetery board do?
So the cemetery board, I probably won't hit every point here, but the cemetery board is tasked with looking at potential expansion of the cemetery, which could include acquiring land. It is also tasked with looking at use of the existing land that the cemetery occupies, so sort of maximizing or enhancing what's there currently. They review use of the cemetery fund dollars. They provide management guidelines of the cemetery, so certain requirements for the location, or not the location, but the what's the word I want to use? It's not the landscaping, the maintenance and care of the area around the graves. So they have a document that they review and approve, and is filed with the city clerk's office. So those are some of their key responsibilities. Jeff is also here if I've wildly missed something, but I think that's a decent summation.
Super, thank you.
Councilmember DeMichelle, do you have any questions?
No questions, Chair Marks.
I have a question. In listing off the roles and responsibilities of the cemetery board, the public may not know, but we have a partnership program with a local funeral home around low-cost access to the cemetery. And this was something that I personally experienced in Minnesota when my mother passed away, 14 years ago now. And it can be extraordinarily expensive. And so we have this partnership. Is the cemetery board involved in managing that partnership?
Well, I will mention to you, as you just touched on, that they are responsible to review the fees. And I am familiar with the burial assistance program. I believe that action involved tasking the city to work with Flintoffs directly to develop and manage that program. So it doesn't sound like they are directly involved.
It's being run through the Parks Department.
Hey, good evening, Chair and other members. Jeff Watling, Parks and Community Services Director. Tisha's correct. The burial assistance program is overseen directly from the Parks Department and Flintoffs through our management agreement that Council adopted a couple years ago.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So, there not being any other questions, before we move to deliberation on this ID and what we want to recommend back to the full council, I would like to offer an opportunity if any members of the public, either physically present with us right now or online, would like to speak to this issue before we deliberate. Now would be the time to come to the lectern or indicate so online. Clerk, do we have any indication of anyone wishing to speak to this issue?
Chair Martz, we don't have anybody online that has indicated a desire to speak on this topic.
All right. Well, let's start with question one. Should we recommend that the council dissolve the Cable TV Commission? Councilmember Ray?
I'll opine first. I think that the Cable Commission played a vital role in the early days of cable television, and we all remember those days when you had no reception in the valley. I think that it's been overtaken by events. It seems like all of the functions and features that it was intended to perform are performed quite admirably by city staff. And I think the biggest thing is, would we lose our channel? And I don't see how having a commission has any bearing on whether or not we would have a channel. We still have an opportunity to influence our cable companies even without a citizen commission. So I see no reason to retain it at this time.
Councilmember DeMichelle?
I concur with Councilmember Ray, and he said that very, very well. I think the telling point for me is the fact that we can't recruit anyone to be on it, and that always says to me that a commission or board's work is done. And the two members of the current commission apparently agree with that. I also want to thank staff. I thought it was the conversation points were laid out very, very clearly, and it was a good piece of work to explain what was going on. So I absolutely concur that we should sunset that. commission.
Thank you, and I'll plus one, the Q&A, the attached Q&A on the functions of the Cable Commission and how those functions would be managed by the city was extremely helpful. I support this as well. It's a little frustrating for me because the Cable Commission did a great job on the tasks that they were assigned 40 years ago. In the meantime, we have a different problem that they can't really help us on, which is data equity, and the fact that some parts of our city have low cost, extremely high throughput data, and other parts of our city struggle to get good data, either terrestrially or wireless. But unfortunately, that's beyond the purview of this body, of the Cable Commission. But, I, for one, would like to just mention to the administration that I would love at some point if we could have a conversation around data equity and how to make sure that the whole city enjoys the kind of data access that the Highlands have, and I think Talus has. I'm getting a maybe, but like many things, I covet the Highlands, and one of the ways that I covet the Highlands living over on Squawk is their data access. So just as a thought for the future. City Administrator Bobkowitz.
Yes, thank you, Chair March. Just to remind the committee that the council did fund some additional work on that very subject in this current year budget. And so we are.
Thank you for that reminder.
We have gone out for an RFP. There are firms that help cities evaluate their connectivity, internet connectivity in various neighborhoods. And so Autumn, I don't know if you know the latest on that, but I believe the RFP's out. I don't believe we have awarded it yet. So that will include a survey of all residents, a technical survey of the infrastructure available, and then recommendations back to the city. So that was funded in the current year budget. And we hoped, I think, to come back to the council probably in the fall with additional information, late in the year. But we're moving forward with that at the council's direction.
Thank you so much, and I apologize for having forgotten that we had done that. Okay, so it sounds like 3 thumbs up for supporting the administration's recommendation. Question 2, I can't read it. It's so small on the screen.
Cemetery board.
Yeah, cemetery board, right. Let's start with Councilmember DiMichele to mix it up. Oh, I'm sorry, wait. Did we? Oh, no, we already took public comment. I just want to make sure, yeah, nobody had comment on any of these 3. Sorry, Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you, Chair Moritz. So with regard to the cemetery board, I support the idea of asking the board to review and offer a suggested path forward, which might include sunsetting. I need to say that when I was first elected to the council, I had a goal of visiting every board and commission during my first year in office. And turned out I didn't meet that goal because of COVID, but one of the boards I did get to visit was the cemetery board. I was really impressed by the amount of knowledge and caring expressed by the members at that time. We remember that Hillside Cemetery contains a lot of our community's history. Everybody on the board at that particular time had a family or a historic connection to the cemetery. I just felt like there was, a very, very caring presence in that board. And also, it's sad to think that it started in 1915, and here we are in 2021 thinking about sunsetting it. But I think it would be a really good discussion for the cemetery board members to have. I'm wondering if we could possibly do something that's a little less than a commission, but possibly a little bit more involved with volunteer involvement, or just recognizing the historic importance of that cemetery. But I think that's a discussion that the cemetery board members could have and come back to us with a productive suggestion. Yeah, this one was a little bit more of a heart tug in terms of discussing ending it. So I look forward to hearing the results of that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ray.
Thanks. I think the cemetery is one of the really unique things about Issaquah, that we as a city have this wonderful cemetery. And I think it is what it is because the cemetery board over the years has nurtured it and guided it. And I remember a couple years ago when we were looking at rate increases and the thoughtful thinking that the cemetery board did to put together a strategy for moving forward with rates was very helpful. I think there's a role to be played. I don't know that maybe we need a cemetery board, but we definitely need citizen direction and involvement in guiding that. And so my thinking is the Parks Board would probably, if we were to dissolve the cemetery board, the Parks Board could pick up that role, because I think it's vital. I think it's important, and we're very lucky to have a municipal cemetery here in this town. And it's weird, but I really love cemeteries. I think they're amazing places. And my only disappointment is after I was off council, I was kind of hoping for an appointment to the cemetery board. So I'm a little bit verklempt if it goes away between then and now. But I think asking them how to move it forward, and then asking them if there's a way to integrate it with the Parks Board would be very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what you're hearing from all three of us, is the recognition of the importance of our cemetery, and the request that as the cemetery board looks at its options, that we see about how to make sure that that unique, special character of our cemetery is continued to be maintained. I love our cemetery. I have a good friend who's buried there. I sort of think I hope to be buried there myself at some point. It's just, it's wonderful, and that I love that we have our ongoing program for folks who need help, so that, at the end of life, families aren't horribly burdened. And so I'm confident that the cemetery board will take that into account as they look at their options going forward. So it sounds like 3 thumbs up on that recommendation. And then evaluating potential sunset or consolidation of any other existing boards or commissions. Councilmember Ray?
I looked at the list. I didn't see anything else that leaped off the page. When I did look at the website, it still has the Recovery Task Force as a thing. I don't know if that's a board or commission. It wasn't on your list, so I don't know if it still has a mission and a role. But I, think that's time to start looking at that, and think maybe we're through recovery. But beyond that, I think the 12 that you presented still perform a vital role.
Councilmember G. Michelle?
Thank you, Chair Martz. I did have some, when I looked at the list, I'm thinking about the future of the Sister Cities Commission. And I noticed that was mentioned as a possible commission that we might want to review. I was a delegate to Sundal, Norway back in 1992 when we established the sister city relationship, and the commission at that time was very active, and of course then we had the addition of a Moroccan relationship, and that was very active, but it seems like it's been a long time since we've had any official activities between either of our 2 sister cities, and any outreach to other possible relationships. Now, last night's council meeting was kind of eye-opening. I thought it was wonderful that we had an international exchange with representatives from Japan. And so possibly there is a future there, but again, I think it's worth a discussion as to whether the current configuration is really what we want to go forward with. And I'm not even clear about whether the sister cities that we have, if we still have relationships with anyone in those cities. So I think this is absolutely overdue for discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would rather see the Sister City Commission re-energized rather than, dismantled. But I mean, I think there's probably a question on how I'd be interested to know how they feel about how things are proceeding. I think there's been more with Chefchaouen in Morocco in the last 10, 15 years than there have been with the other sister cities. But even that there hasn't been much in the last decade. I think there may have been some private groups that did some work with Chefchaouen, but anyhow, so I guess I'm with that as well. I would be interested to ask the Sister City Commission if they felt that there was a potential for a different direction for them to take, I guess. be my, I see heads acknowledging from the other council members on the committee. So, Clerk Geezer, do you have the information you wanted from us on this item?
Yes, I certainly do, and we will be planning to bring the cable TV ordinance to the full city council at the July 18th council meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the presentation and all the information. With that, we're going to move to ID 1169, Human Services Strategic Plan, Grants, Program, and Emergency Housing Options. Monica Negrilla with Human Services is going to be speaking with us, as well as others.
Mr. Chair, before we move on to the next item, Tim Smith is in the audience, and Tim doesn't come to council meetings, at least doesn't come as a participant very often. And I really want to just take a moment to thank him for his leadership, certainly through everything we've done with the pandemic and then the move back into this room. You know, we, as we all know, had a sort of a turn on a very quick dime to continue to produce council meetings through his leadership and the work with our IT staff. We made that transition pretty seamlessly. When we moved back into this room over the last few months, you know, he helped us be very strategic, really understanding that this is a television studio as much as it is a community meeting room. And I think you've noticed, although I don't know that we've ever talked about it, the lights in the room have been upgraded a little bit. We've cleaned things up so that the whole general appearance looks better. He's also worked very closely with the court because, of course, the day job for this room is the court, and they have been hybrid throughout and are one of the few municipal courts in the state of Washington to have done that, all really with Tim's leadership. So before we move on to the next item, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I just wanted to take an opportunity, since he's here, not running around connecting cables and making sure everything's working properly, but here on the more the policy side of what he does. And certainly thanks go to him for the work with Comcast over the pandemic and the issues there. He's cultivated the relationships we need as a community. You know, that all was done based on just kind of poking. They had no contractual obligation, nothing we could hold over them other than saying we had residents who needed better service, and Tim helped make that all happen. So thank you for letting me just spend a moment to recognize him before he runs off with the rest of his evening. Thank you.
He's also one of the genuinely nicest people that I know. I don't recall ever seeing Tim in a bad mood, and I've been working with him for many, many, many years. Ms. Negrilla.
Thank you. Good evening, council members. And I have an internal joke with Tim. I always ask him before meetings to make us look smart and pretty, so I always appreciate that. Good evening. Thank you so much for having us. I'm Monica Negrilla, Human Services Manager here at the city. We bring a few human services items for you tonight for discussion, and we have a few guests with us from the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, KCRHA. We have online Alexis Mercedes Rink. She's a sub-regional planning manager. And then we also have Mallory Van Abima. She's the East King County Sub-Regional Planning Manager. In addition, we have human services staff here in the room and online. We have a couple of human services commissioners, and as always, our fearless leader, Jeff Watling, Parks and Community Services Director. So we have a nice big crowd tonight. We appreciate that. So beginning with the two of the items that we would like your feedback on tonight. One is a returning item to you tonight. I apologize as I'm trying to move with my slides. So one is a returning item to you following your recommendation from the council study session in April, discussing the human services grants funding allocations. And then second, we are introducing a new item for you tonight, and we are proposing a pilot for an emergency housing program, and we would love to explore that with you. And so you might ask, why are we bringing these two items together? We really believe that they both fall under the broader framework of human services initiatives, and so really it seemed disingenuous for us not to bring them together. With that, we would like to start with the human services grants funding allocations. With your permission, we can stop at any point for questions. Then we'll move to the second one and hopefully deliberations at the end, if that's okay with you, Chair Mart.
Sounds great.
Okay, thank you so much. So while there are multiple variables and options, we have a few more specific questions for you tonight. Regarding the human services grants, our main question is, are you supportive of having a formula for the human services grants funding allocations? For the pilot emergency housing program, again, just simply, is this committee supportive of piloting this program where we can go and further explore, come back to you with additional information? Or would you like to propose something different? Would you like us to do some more research, do something different? Or lastly, what type of information should we bring back to you, especially when discussing these two items? Next, just to provide a little bit of a context and placing these two items within the Human Services Strategic Plan, you may recall from a few months ago when we were discussing the strategic plan, we categorized the initiatives based on the funding needs into three buckets. One, we had initiatives that we believe that we can implement with existing human services staffing. These would be connections that we provide to residents, supporting nonprofits, providing technical assistance, perhaps conducting trainings and educational sessions. And then we had a second bucket with initiatives that could be funded through the human services grants. And then third, we identified a few initiatives that would require additional funds, one-time or ongoing funds. So that's why tonight we would like to address those last two buckets, in particular the human services grants and then a new program project that requires additional funds. And so on to the human services program. What we hope to do as we are returning to you from the study session in April, we would love to review and address the feedback that we received at that study session. We would like then to discuss the formula that we were proposing for you tonight, and then also discuss the alignment with the other investments. So on your screen here, you have a summary of what our understanding is of the feedback that we received back in April. So from identifying funding gaps and needs and opportunities to make a difference, to really prioritizing local services in the community, considering increasing funding and average grant levels, to focusing on the goals. What we did, again, we just tried our best to understand and summarize all the feedback that we received from you, and we tried to organize them in two buckets. Items that we can work on and address with the Human Services Commission, and these would be, again, just ensuring that gaps from the strategic plan are considered, prioritize local services, identify programs that yield more strategic results, and a bucket of items that we would love to discuss with you tonight. And those include, in particular, presenting information on other jurisdictions, proposing a formula for consideration, discussing funding needs, and then, again, including other human services items for consideration. So I'm going to go down the list, starting with information on neighboring jurisdiction. We certainly reached out to our neighboring cities, but we also reached out to all 16 cities that we are in the collaborative with the human services grants. What you have on the screen is just an example of what processes some of the cities have. And for example, the city of Kirkland and Sammamish, they don't have a specific set process. They usually reevaluate every 2 years their funding, what the needs are. They look at what resources exist, and they might allocate one-time funding. The city of Bellevue and Redmond, they have a more organized process that includes typically a CPI increase and the population growth percentage. And then the city of Snoqualmie and actually Shoreline as well, they assign a portion of their general funds to human services. This last process, we learned that actually some other cities are trying and recently have moved away from assigning a percentage of their general funds to human services because what they learned was that in times of crisis, when general fund dollars decrease, that's typically when human services needs are higher, and so then that would impact human services allocations. So that's just a summary of examples of what other jurisdictions are doing. Similar to that, we also looked at the per capita allocations for the cities in the region, and there's quite a large range and variety. We have cities that have a $5 per capita allocation, and then we have cities that go up in the mid-20s, upper 20s. So our city is really kind of like in the middle. And then also comparing our city size with other cities, again, we are kind of in that mixture of in the middle. Certainly I can pause for more questions as you might have them, but I'm gonna move forward to share with you the one formula that we would like to propose to you tonight, which includes adding a CPI, Consumer Price Index, to our existing baseline, especially now when the inflation rate is so high. This may be important to look at. We also understand that the CPI may fluctuate from year to year. As you can see on the screen and in your report, right now it's an all-time high. Certainly we looked at other formulas. We would like to present this really as a mid-step or as an intermediate step until we gather more information from the Human Services Strategic Plan implementation. As our city's been moving more and more to gather data and the metrics, we would love to perhaps start with this and then consider and look into, once we have more data, to consider other options. Some of the other options that we looked into include adding a population growth as well. That for Issaquah, for now, it's a 0.7%, for example. But we also looked at something maybe unique that no other cities are doing, and that would be, let's say, if we maintain the same per capita level, we could consider adding an increase just for a certain population. Like, for example, if our poverty rate is 7.7%, we can consider a higher per capita rate for that population. But we don't have enough data, and it would be nice for us to continue with the Human Services Strategic Plan implementation, gather more data before we go in depth on those options. But certainly those are options. And then last but not least, of course, we cannot talk about a formula without talking about the needs, and rightfully so, you brought them up at the last meeting as well. And here I would like to make the distinction between the community needs and the funding needs, right? We identify the community needs in the Human Services Strategic Plan, but that's quite different from the funding needs. And certainly, there are multiple ways to go about identifying what is the funding need. And I think the more we look deeper, the more we realize, just as you rightfully also mentioned in April, is that as a local government, it would be very, very difficult for us to make a real impact. If you look at the real needs and funding needs, even just, for example, if we look at the wage gap, we would start probably at minimum $30 million investments to really make an impact. So it would be difficult for us as a small jurisdiction unless, again, we leverage other resources, we look at what else is in the region, and so forth. And so that's why we would love, as I mentioned, let's continue implementing the strategic plan. Let's look for opportunities for us to find targeted funding and opportunities to make impact, and we'll go from there. So that actually takes me to, I'm ready to continue with the next item. It's a good segue, but I will pause in case there are questions here before.
Councilmember DeMichelle, do you have any questions at this point?
I do not. Thank you.
Please continue.
Okay, thank you so much. So, as mentioning, we would love to look for opportunities for targeted investments and opportunities to leverage resources and make an impact. This takes me to our second item, and that is piloting an emergency housing program that we would like to propose to you tonight. This is just a visual, again, on kind of like where it falls within the Human Services Strategic Plan. And so I think the first question you might be asking us is, why this project and why not? Why now, right? And so I would love to start with the fact that we now have enough data to really confidently say that this is an identified need in our local community. As you may recall, last year we started a homeless outreach program. We took the year and the opportunity to really dive deeper and learn what's the face of homelessness in Issaquah, what are the real needs, what are the challenges. So we have quite a few information there. But in addition to that, we also identified a few opportunities. During the emergency weather sheltering events, we built a really strong connection with our partners at Motel 6. They really understand the work that we are doing. They understand this model. They are very supportive of us. In addition to that, we also identified timely opportunities for certain funds and funding options that I'm going to discuss in just a minute. And then as the regional level, we are always looking on how are we aligned with other regional entities. And so in our collaboration with the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, then we identified some opportunities to collaborate there as well. So these are a few of the reasons why we would love to bring this to you tonight. And with that, I'm going to pause a little bit to invite our guests from KCRHA. They would like to provide an update on where they are as a regional jurisdiction and a little bit about our collaboration with them. So Alexis, Mercedes Rink, and Mallory, welcome.
Hello. So thankful to be with you all tonight. Our apologies for not being there in person. I know we want to get out there soon again to see you all, but thank you so much for having us tonight. My name is Alexis Mercedes Rink. I'm the Sub-Regional Planning Manager. Mallory, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good evening. My name is Mallory Van Abema. I am the East King County Sub-Regional Planning Specialist with KCRHA. Thank you so much for allowing us some space this evening.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
So I know that you've had an opportunity to hear from KCRHA in the past, but this is my first opportunity to interface with you all. So I just wanted to provide a very high-level overview of who we are, our foundational guiding principles, and our governing mechanisms before we shift into some pieces that are kind of neatly woven into this proposed pilot program that we're extremely excited about, the City of Issaquah potentially taking leadership on. So KCRHA's mission is to significantly decrease the incidences of homelessness throughout the entirety of King County. We do that by evoking equity and social justice principles. Our work is guided by our theory of change, and the theory of change is if we create a homelessness response system that centers customer voice, or the voices of the people with lived experience of homelessness, then we will be able to focus on responding to needs, eliminating inequities, in order to end homelessness for all. Thank you. So our founding interlocal agreement from the City of Seattle and King County describes the role and scope and purpose of KCRHA is intent on unifying planning and coordination of funding and services for folks experiencing homelessness, oversight on policy and contract management and performance management. And then we are also our regional continuum of care. We've assumed the responsibility as the continuum of care agency, receiving funding directly from the Department of Housing and Urban Development to directly invest back into the homelessness response system and get folks the services and resources that they need. We are also tasked with creating an ombuds office, which is a resource for folks accessing the homelessness response system, for providers, for people in the community, a broad resource to ensure that we are remaining accountable on our work and that folks have a very clear pathway to elevate concerns as they are either personally navigating or working alongside someone who is navigating the system or observing some hang up or bottleneck or concern within the homelessness response system. We're also tasked with establishing clear metrics and milestones for measuring the success of a transformation of a region-wide homelessness response system, ensuring that all of that is maintaining accountability and transparency. And then finally, we have three different governing entities. So we have our governing committee. This is 11 members. We have Eastside representation, but they are essentially in charge of our high-level guidance, so approving our budgets, holding our CEO accountable, and then we also have an implementation board, which functions quite similarly to a board of directors. And then finally, we have our COC, our Continuum of Care Advisory Board, which is comprised of providers, folks with lived experience, and they are really helping us ensure that as the COC agency for the region, that we are doing the best work that we can and holding us accountable in that space as well. I think next is just a quick visual on what we do and don't do. As a new agency recently launched, I think there's been the need to just ensure clarity around what KCRHA is and isn't involved in. We're closely partnered with the City of Seattle and with King County, but KCRHA is not in the business of housing capital and development on the infrastructure side, but we do manage all of the continuum of care funded programs, including shelters, and then all of the programs you see here, diversion, rapid rehousing, the coordinated entry system, which is where folks actually enter and are able to access resources that meet their needs, the best resources available that can adequately meet their needs. We also manage the Homelessness Management Information System, which is a region-wide database of folks that are accessing services that are funded by us and also participating in HMIS. And we also manage outreach efforts through certain providers across the region. So just a quick visual on what we do and don't do. And at that, I think that I'm going to hand it over to Alexis to talk a bit about kind of our longer term planning work.
Well, thank you, Mallory. And so we wanted to talk about two longer term planning pieces, and just starting with the 5-year plan and then going into our proposed budget. So we wanted to preview a little bit of the work around the 5-year plan because it's likely you'll be hearing some things potentially in community, especially since this is a big focus area right now. Within our founding legislation, we have a requirement to deliver upon there we go, which really delivers upon the high-level vision for the agency. And so just to ground you into what needs to be included in the 5-year plan, we need to account for a theory of change, which we luckily have one already, and that is centering the voices of those with lived experience, so we can check that box off. The second piece is around specific measurable outcomes and goals, so really getting clear on what are our goals for the next couple of years as a system, and also how are we going, what are the outcomes we're going to be looking for. The next piece is around sub-regional planning activities. We would love the opportunity to come back and talk to you all about how that work is shaping up specifically for the East Side. And so we'd love to come in person and be able to talk a little bit more about that beyond tonight. And following the sub-regional activities piece, we have requirements to share procurement processes. We've had a team working around equitable procurement, working in partnership with small providers, buy-in for community-based agencies around putting together an equitable procurement process that would be included in the 5-year plan. The next area is around consistent terms and conditions for contracts. So getting really clear around what is required by HUD that we need to report on, what's required by the state and the various fund sources that we kind of manage, and also where's there room for flexibility and how can we create contracts that are able to be reasonably implemented upon and have folks reporting at a reasonable level of information and valuable information that helps us make system level decisions. The next piece is tied to that, and that's really around consistent standards for data collection, monitoring, and evaluating our systems and program performance. So really getting clear on what kind of performance metrics and things are we going to be looking at. As we know, performance metrics drives the activities. And so this is a real chance to reimagine and rebuild how we evaluate success. And the last piece is kind of a catch-all category. You could tell that when there was the deliberation in setting up the authority, this is kind of the catch-all area, which really is focused on internally, how will the KCRHA work on continuous improvement, evaluating our community engagement, especially with folks with lived experience, how we remain compliant with the continuum of care guidelines set by HUD, how do we work upon improving accountability through our Ombuds Office and data collection. So that's a bit about the 5-year plan. I'm going to go a little bit into about our proposed budget. In just the year of operations that we've been going through, really with only 6 months fully operational and having taken over the contracts from City of Seattle and King County, we've already identified just through practice a variety of needs in our current system. We have gaps in our current services around high acuity shelter, high acuity referring to folks who have a variety of complex health and behavioral needs and experiencing homelessness. We've highlighted that there's a need for emergency housing. So looking at more indoor spaces that are non-congregate for folks to be. As we know, the wait list currently for a Section 8 housing voucher is about 5 years. We have many folks who are outdoors who have been essentially determined eligible for a housing voucher, but nowhere to be. And so looking at what do interim solutions look like through developing a program like emergency housing. We are also looking at the fact that we have a gap in safe parking programs around the region. We have needs around us addressing severe weather as well, both for heat and smoke and cold. We're looking at addressing the ongoing effects of COVID from looking at provider wages, which we'll get into momentarily, and then further looking at our own operations and trying to make sure we have the staffing support to fully support all the work. And with that translates into our budget request. And so we are looking at budget additions to account for exactly these things. And so when we're looking at really looking at safe parking, this budget ask would allow for us to serve 194 folks living out of vehicles annually. For daytime community spaces, we could be serving an additional 1,400 people every year. Our emergency housing ask of 20 million would allow to create 345 additional beds. And our ask around high acuity shelter would allow for 55 high acuity shelter beds. And so we also recognize that our system, as I know I've heard Councilmember DeMichelle talk about, I think the last time I was in a meeting with you all, we have a tremendous need to be accounting for the amazing service providers that do these services, and we have accounted that into our budget request. So being able to provide for increases for frontline staff, to hold steady our system and be able to maintain so folks can continue to do the good work and also be able to live good lives when they go home from work and live in this community. In summary, we're also looking at being able to provide additional compensation for folks with lived experience and smaller BIPOC agencies to participate in regional planning, and then always seeking out technical assistance for smaller providers as well. And so what we're trying to move from, this is our kind of current system. We have folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. They get connected either through a rapid rehousing program, which provides for a temporary rental assistance and support for a period of time. I know Mallory's own experience. She was a rapid rehousing case manager for a period of time and could probably speak better to even that program. But we also have another pathway where folks are in congregate shelter spaces and they get entered into the coordinated entry for all system and go into a housing placement. CEA will match them with a permanent housing solution that best would meet their needs, but we have very limited options in permanent housing. What we want to move to and what our budget is actually seeking to do is to acknowledge that the journey from unsheltered homelessness and into permanent housing needs to be nuanced and needs to actually account for the fact that many folks have a variety of different needs. And we want to create additional options for those folks. So we still have rapid rehousing included at the top there and shelter included in the middle there, but we've created 2 additional options. One, emergency housing, again, looking at spaces that are non-congregate, non-time limited, and so single room setting spaces, and investing in that type of model. And then we're also looking at high acuity shelter to account for the fact that we do have a portion of our unhoused community that is in need of a higher level of service, and looking at how we can create models that are fully support the needs of those folks. And so once in that interim space, through CEA, being able to adjust CEA so we can account for the appropriate housing for that person's stage of life and create a better spectrum of supportive housing models, whether that's light touch or something that's along the lines of longer term assisted living, wanting to invest in these types of housing models so we can better stabilize folks in their path for stability. My apologies. Sorry about that. The joys of working from home. And with that, that takes us to the end. She was ready for me to be done. And we're happy to take any questions you have.
So, Monica, can you explain for our benefit and for the benefit of the audience why we're getting an overview on KCRHA?
Yes, thank you so much, Councilmember Martz. And thank you so much for our guests for their presentation. I think we wanted to show and discuss with you the idea that we are trying to propose a local service here, a local option. However, we don't want to just be in a silo and isolated. We want to integrate it and make sure that we align with other regional plans. So we thought that this is a good opportunity to invite King County Regional Homelessness Authority to provide an overview of the work that they are doing and for us to discuss on how our work may or may not align with their priorities. So that was the intent.
All right. So with that in mind, do we have any questions before we move on to discussing the actual proposed emergency housing program? Councilmember DeMichelle?
I do not. That was a very comprehensive presentation. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much. And so I'm going to continue and move. I have a few more slides here to go and diving a little bit deeper into our proposal. My next 2 slides are borrowed from KCRHA. This is a slide that you just saw in their presentation, and I just added there a yellow star that this is where our proposed emergency housing model would fit in their continuum, in the larger continuum in the region. And then next, I liked this visual because I really believe that our project, what we are proposing, really, I think this is a nice visual that explains on how what we are proposing really is meant to bridge the gap between the shelter system and folks who are unsheltered in the streets and really permanent housing. Here I would like to add that as you know and you are familiar with our homeless outreach program, since last year when we started the program, and this was a really big surprise for us, our team engaged with 112 unduplicated homeless folks in Issaquah. And I think what's different and what we noticed that is different in here, locally in Issaquah, is that about 50% of those really live unsheltered, either in camps or on the street. And this is quite different from the rest of East King County. When we looked at the 2020 point in time count, we just didn't have the most recent one, only 11% of the folks who are homeless in East King County live in camps or in the street. The other ones, the vast majority, are in some sort of shelter. And so I think that is something concerning for us because we really just do not have enough services to connect these folks to. So now on to what are we actually proposing. So what we were thinking is to start with a pilot. In our partnership with Motel 6, we were thinking about renting for 1 year a dozen rooms to turn them into an emergency housing program. We would also love to work with service provider who would monitor services and would provide the on-site services for folks who are there, from making sure that people have meals and they have their basic needs covered, that stability that is so much needed, but really to providing that case management if there are like employment services, educational services, life skills, that long-term connection. We would hope to provide that with a service provider. And then we would also love to continue to work with Motel 6, where they would provide all the other supports, from utilities to parking to nighttime security services. So it would be like a three-way collaboration between us, Motel 6, and the shelter provider. There are certainly other variables here we can discuss as you might have, and we can certainly bring back additional information, but since this is just a very initial first time when this is in front of you, just wanted to provide that high level information. As we started thinking about budget needs and funding needs, some of the areas that we identified as possible funding sources, one of them, and I think the main one for us, would be possibilities through the tax dollars that our city chose to receive through House Bill 1590. If you remember, I believe last year our city decided to add those sale taxes to our budget, and those are allocated especially for affordable housing. That includes also mental health services. So this program would fall under those eligible categories. Of course, we would love to, and that's actually the second reason why we wanted to have KCRHA here as well, because we would love to explore funding opportunities for services should those become available. And so we would love to consider applying for a grant from the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. So we would love to continue exploring those options. Not sure how much we would love to dive deeper and how realistic it is, but we could, at some point, we discussed possible ARPA allocation, American Rescue Plan Act allocations. This may or may not be realistic at this time, but also we would love to explore other sources as well. We would love to look to see if there are any state dollars or private donations as well that we could access. And next, I would like to just provide a brief high-level initial preliminary budget details. We broke down the budget into two categories. Facility and operation cost, we are looking at around $300,000. And the program and service cost, we would look at another, depending on how the program gets identified. We can go as low as $250,000 to $400,000. Here it depends on the number of staff support that we would have. So the total cost of the project would be anywhere between $500,000 and $700,000 under those details that I just mentioned. In terms of what are the options next, or a proposed timeline, if this committee considers that we can further explore this program and project, we would love, after this committee meeting, to begin some community conversations, get feedback from the community. We would love to gather information based on your feedback, perhaps come back to a meeting in July, continue community conversations. We could, with your permission, then consider coming back in August to a committee of the whole, perhaps come to a full council meeting in September. And again, if all the details work out, then perhaps to include all the details into the budget process that you're gonna go through in the fall with an estimated request for proposals for a service provider in late fall, and perhaps, again, if everything works out, starting the pilot in January. Again, just high level, we are very open to feedback and discussion questions from you. And before I'm just gonna pause, I just have a couple of more details to add. This is just a visual on how it fits within, again, the strategic planning. You have on the screen, again, the questions that we are proposing for you tonight. As far as options, we can come back with a proposed formula for human services grants. We can continue exploring the emergency housing options. We can take a totally different approach based on your feedback, or take no further action if that is your input. Our recommendation certainly would be to, on one end, implement a formula for the human services grants, but also we would love to pilot the emergency housing model as a targeted investment in human services funds. And so that concludes my presentation. And on the screen, again, you have the questions. Are you supportive of establishing a formula for human services grants? Are you supportive of piloting the emergency housing model? Would you like to recommend something else, or what type of information would be helpful for us to bring back to you? Thank you.
And I will see, first off, if there are any questions from my fellow council members, and I see Councilmember Ray is ready with at least one question.
At least one question. Thank you, Chair Martz. Monica, thank you for that. And Alexis and Mallory, thank you for the presentation on KCRHA, because that was great context. But it really leads me to my first question, which is, how is what we're talking about here different than the mission and scope of KCRHA?
I don't believe it's necessarily different. I think it's just a local response. I'm trying to go back and look at their mission.
I think City Administrator Bob Quitz would like to help.
Thank you, Chair Martz. We've spent a lot of time thinking about next steps. Certainly, Councilmember Ray, other members of the council have really challenged us over the last many months to look at what our role in all this is. That I think the council has said we want to make sure that those individuals in this community are served, but we also want to make sure that the services we're providing are complementary to other services, do not duplicate other services, because there is certainly need everywhere. There's lots of resources, but there's probably not enough resources. And I think, as you've heard this evening from the KCRHA staff, they are still looking for resources, significant resources from our larger brother and sister jurisdictions, King County, the City of Seattle. So with that, we've said, what can we do to help people? And I think, as Monica has indicated, we have now in place with our behavioral health specialists, I think, a very good program to identify Issaquah residents in need, to provide help for them. But we're discovering that the one piece that we cannot provide, and there are no others that can provide, is the shelter, that temporary shelter, as additional services are provided to help people get to the point where they can hopefully shelter themselves. So that's where this proposal comes from. As we've worked with the Regional Homeless Authority, this is their goal too. However, it's a big county with lots of people in need, and there are limited outside resources. As I think as was referred to by Alexis, there's a $20 million ask to the City of Seattle just for their piece of this puzzle, let alone the rest of the county. So we think this is very complementary. Quite honestly, the administration is proud of the work that our staff has done to say, we have a need here, we cannot wait any longer. Let's come up with something that we think makes sense. We have a funding source through the sales tax, the 1/10 of 1% sales tax, which has been in place now for, what, a year and a half. And those dollars in the bank are $1.4, $1.5 million. We expect it to be close to $2 million by the end of the year, and no designated purpose for that, with an asterisk that the transit-oriented development project will likely need some additional funding, and so I think we all recognize that that serves as a potential pot too. So I think we're excited about what we have here. We think it's very complementary to what the Regional Homeless Authority is doing. They have a very, very tough assignment, and that is the rest of the county. We think we have a plan that will be complementary to the work that we're already doing with our behavioral health specialists that will continue to help Issaquah residents. And as we understand the policy direction from the council, that is your desire for the focus, that we continue to help Issaquah residents. Hopefully that at least begins to answer your question.
I think that answered my question. But I have one follow-up, because there was one thing that really resonated with me in the KCRHA, when I really have a hard time getting that acronym out, but KCRHA presentation, that was specific and measurable outcomes and goals. And how do you measure success? So have you given any thought to how we'd do that? If we were to create our own, mini-me program, how would we go about measuring success?
Thank you so much for that question. We always start with that, and for homelessness, it's very, very difficult. But one of the items that we are looking at, or one of the ways in which we want to measure success, is really to be able to see less individuals who are homeless on our streets, in our parks. So then we can see them successfully connected with the services they need to begin their journey out of homelessness and back into society. So that's our biggest way to measure success in this case. And also our biggest challenge right now when we engage with them and we just don't have a place to connect them to.
And if I could just amplify the very last point, we are measuring it, and we are measuring failure on that last point. Yes. That we have the service, we have the resources to identify people in need, we have the resources to triage what those needs are, we have partnerships with other providers to help those individuals, but it comes to the point where if they do not have a roof over their head, it makes all the other services that we're providing, it does not allow that continuum to move forward. So I don't want to say we're failing, but I think as we are measuring the work that we're doing, we have clearly identified this as the number one piece of a puzzle that we're not able to provide, nor is anyone else. We go currently to other providers in Snoqualmie, North Bend for housing, Bellevue for housing. Many times our behavioral health specialists know exactly who to call, and they call and they find out there is no room. And so then we're left, in some cases, I know from talking to the staff, that we have to tell the individual, yes, you have appointments with appropriate mental health professionals, but you need to remain on the street because there's no place else for you to go. So I think that is a measure certainly of a need for improvement, and I think really one of the drivers that brings us here this evening is that we have that data. We know the people, we know that we have other resources. It's that piece of providing a roof over their head while they're getting on their feet that we just don't have.
Councilmember Ray, do you have other questions at this point?
Not at this moment, thank you.
Councilmember DiMaggio.
No questions at this time. Thank you, Chair Martz.
I have a couple. That the 0.1% sales tax that we enacted a while back, what's the annual revenue on that?
It's been estimated, in this year's budget, it's estimated $800,000.
Okay, so it would cover the anticipated cost. That anticipated, I think it was 550 to 750. Is that the total anticipated cost of this program?
That is the total anticipated cost with what we were proposing, with having a daytime service provider and support from Motel 6 for nighttime services and for the dozen rooms, yes.
And I have a third question. Have we talked at all to, so this is, you're all in the Parks Department, have we talked to IPD or any other departments about the practical side of running this program?
Yes, we did touch base early on with our partners in IPD. I know that one of the challenges that they brought on early on was on weekends and evenings when they need to, sometimes they really have a high need to provide a shelter to someone, and nobody's available and nothing's available. So I think this could be a good resource for them as well. Sometimes they interact with people in the middle of the night that are fleeing domestic violence situations, and they need to find a place for them right away, and they don't have it. So that is one area for in which I know IPD is very open and excited to have some resources available.
So they're generally supportive of this particular proposal?
Yes, from initial conversations with them, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I don't think there's any other questions right now. This is a point where I would ask if any members of the public, either present or, and I see at least one hand going up, but I will also mention if you're remote and you want to participate in this conversation, please indicate, as we said earlier, raise your hand or other mechanisms. But we do have one individual here, so I'll ask you to come forward and give your name and address in relationship to the city, and you've got 5 minutes.
Hello, my name is Doug Schlepp, and I work here in Issaquah, work loss.
There we
There we
go.
go.
So we can record your comments for us.
Yeah. My name is Doug Schlepp, and I work here in the city. I live in Sammamish. I work at Worklofts off Gilman, and have been a long time consultant to the city, but I'm not acting in that capacity at this moment. And I just want to thank the city for the work that they're doing. My wife and I have been doing street outreach for the past year, working with the Issaquah Food Bank, the city. We've been attending regular meetings with the city regarding this issue. And I second the comments made by the city administrator and Monica and staff and the efforts. This is, to put a face on it, we probably met over 100 people over this last year, know them by name, got to know their history. Some of them are third-generation residents of Issaquah. This is, I used to think that this was Seattle's problem, but reality, and I don't know if problem is a good word for it, but this is a concern, I think, of the city, and I think the city is recognizing that. In addition to residents, we also have seen people who work here in the city and then are living on the streets. And I think some of the issues that they face are security. If you're living on the street or in a tent and you want to get a meal that's being provided across town, you either take all your possessions with you or leave them behind, and they're subject to being looted. And so security and finding a safe place that's secure, reliable, and you can lock the door behind you, things that we take for granted, are really critical to the next step. And I think the successes that what we saw over this past year were things like getting an ID. And getting an ID could take months. And it's just that the challenge of having a safe place to lay your head at night, and then being able to then take that next step towards normalcy. And I think the one thing that I learned over this last year is I used to approach this from my perspective. And my perspective is one where I have a home, I have a stable environment, I have a job, and I would impose that on the people I would see on the streets. Why doesn't that person just get a job? And it's really unfair because they are coming from a place that I can't even fathom. And I really want to encourage the council, the city to move forward with this program. I think it's important. And I heard the representatives from the King County agency talk about ending homelessness, and that would be incredible if we could do that. And I think that's the ultimate goal, but the steps forward are going to be incremental, and I really applaud the city in making that effort to make that a reality. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Is there anyone else either in the room or remote who wishes to speak to this issue before we deliberate it?
Yes, Chair Martz, we have next up wishing to speak Aaron Longchari. Aaron, I am now making you a panelist. You should see the option to unmute, and you may also turn on your video. Aaron?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm having issues with my video.
Well, we can hear
So
you.
my
We can hear
apologies.
you just fine. So,
Great. Thank you, City Administrator and the council, and Alexis, Monica, thank you guys all so much for your wonderful presentation. I'm Erin Longchari. I am the Director of Operations and Programs at the Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank. I would like to extend our full support of the city's emergency shelter proposal plan. Local available supportive shelter services are an enormous gap in our community for our residents. It is an absolutely critical area of need. We at the food bank are a very close partner of the city's human services team, and we're often the first point of contact for people in crisis who need this service. We need a place where the residents that our partner agencies work with on a daily, weekly, yearly basis sometimes, and thank you to Doug, we work so closely together. He and Susan have been such amazing partners in this work. We need a place where these residents can have some safe respite, whether to stay safe from some weather extremes, have medical recovery after surgery, to find mental health or substance abuse treatment and vital case management services, among many other reasons. But those ones in particular that I've highlighted are instances where the food bank has spent our vital and scarce financial donation resources around providing emergency hotel shelter for individuals that we work with on a daily basis who need this kind of service and help. We couldn't express more the gap that exists around this type of program. And I think the city administrator just highlighted exactly what's different about a program like this and how it can be the link between somebody coming to the food bank at 6:59 p.m. before we close in crisis, which happens often, and we can provide tarps, tents, food, all sorts of emergency supplies, and they may have an appointment or a case management provider meeting in a day or two to get into treatment or to get a medical issue resolved. But rather than being able to have a safe temporary respite spot for these individuals, these residents whom we know and care so deeply for, we have to send them back out to the street. Sometimes they return to us and sometimes they don't. And that is where we as a city and as a community can do so much better. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this partnership. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Clerk, has anyone else indicated an interest in speaking?
Yes, Chair Martz. Next up is Brad Poston. Brad, I am making you a panelist. You should now be able to unmute and also turn on your video.
Perfect. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here this evening with all of you. I want to say, well, first of all, I'm Brad Poston. I'm the Director of Operations for the Motel 6 operated by Icon Hospitality there in Issaquah. We're new to the community, but this initiative is not new to me. They say that things happen for a reason, and I believe that wholly. In my own past, I've sat on the board of directors for nonprofits that have addressed this issue across the country from Colorado on. And it really does come down to resources and a culture of care. And I think that's where our partnership and our side is coming from, is our values and Icon Cares, one of our corporate values, and Heart for Service, one of our franchise values, for the brand itself during crises, just like the one we went through together as partners successfully recently. We're just coming back to the table to you all and just saying how much we admire the community, how much we support you and your efforts, and how wonderful this opportunity to become partners is. So thank you all very much for the hard work. Monica, Amir, all of you, you guys are wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'll give back my time.
Thank you so much for your comments, and thank you for joining us this evening. Clerk, do we have anyone else who's indicated a desire
Yes,
to
we
speak?
do, Chair Martz. Paul Lawali is wishing to speak on this topic. Paul, I am now making you a panelist. You should see the option to unmute, and you may turn on your video.
Yeah, good evening, council members. My name is Paul Lawali. I work with Friends of Youth, and we are a local East Side service provider for homeless youth or unsheltered youth. And I just wanted to join the folks who have gone before me and just echo some of the things that Aaron has said related to the need for safe respite, the need to provide folks with places where they can find not only just clothing, food, but also a place to whatever services they need, especially mental health, behavioral health, substance use. So I highly encourage the city to go along with this pilot program. We've been in the local area for 7 years, and we've worked with the city of Issaquah and with Monica for a while. But we just think that, if I had to just give my professional opinion, right now the need is so great. And how many people from Issaquah have to go all the way to Bellevue or Seattle on any given night, especially when it's severe weather. It's just one of these very dire needs. So fully support this as a service provider, and I hope that you can pilot this. And I love that the city of Issaquah has taken a proactive stance of saying, well, let's go ahead and recommend a pilot, and let's see what's out there, and let's see how we can work on this. So thank you very much for your time. And I hope you move forward with this pilot.
Thank you for your comments. Clerk?
I see no other members of the public indicating a desire to speak on this topic, Chair Martz, although I would like to remind those that did speak if you could lower your virtual hands, please.
Do we have anyone else present who wishes to speak to this issue? Seeing none and seeing no further activity remotely, we will move to discussion of the 4 issues that are in front of us. And Ms. Negrilla, if you could please put those 4 questions back up, just as a reminder for us. First question is the committee supportive of establishing a formula for human services grants funding allocations? With that, let's start with Council Member DeMichelle.
Thank you. I have to stop and say I was really moved by the comments tonight. And so thanks to everybody that took the time to come in and talk to us. On the human services grants, I, of course, support the idea of a formula. And I think you may have seen the email that I sent earlier. I do have concerns about how that will play out given the timing that's being proposed and the amount of money that's being proposed. And if Manager Negrilla can correct me if I'm wrong, and I realize it's a projection, but the projection is $500,000 for human services grants in 23 and 24. And then using the formula, we would increase that in 25, 26 to 543,000. And I realize that's a projection and that there are discussions we could have about the formula. But my concern is the one that Alexis Rink alluded to. First of all, we're facing monumental inflation during this time. The Eastside Human Services Forum has identified pay inequity in the human services field as one of the driving issues. Currently, the pandemic exacerbated the issue, but we have relied on people in the human services field to take minimum wage salaries for a very long time. And that has caught up with us, and it caught up with us during the pandemic in big time. And so human services organizations, social service organizations are grappling with how they can begin to give people living wages. And so all of that is increasing the need for additional funding. And on top of that, we have the high cost of living on the east side. We have all of the expenses that for-profit companies face. And so I look at the formula, I look at what's being proposed, and I think this is not meeting the need. And I understand that we will never, as a city, be able to meet all of the need. But I would urge us to make a more substantial investment in those human services grants, just because our human services are facing some major challenges right now. The need is very great. We are still in recovery from the pandemic. And all of that says to me that we need to do more. We need to make a real increase, a real investment in those human services grants. So I'm going to put it out there again. I would like to see us increase for 23, 24. I mean, immediately. I'd like to see us put $100,000 more per year in each of those budgets and use $600,000 a year as our baseline for calculating the formula for 25, 26, and going forward. That's my proposal. I'm certainly willing and eager to hear what my fellow council members have to say. But I think if we just rely on the formula that's been presented, that our investment in those human services grants is going to be eaten up completely by inflation, by wage increases, and by the business expenses that are facing our human services organizations in Issaquah. So that's my concern, and that's my proposal. Thank you, Chair Marks.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Councilmember Ray.
I have a couple thoughts on this. One is I'm 100% supportive of being formula driven. It just makes it easier, makes it more predictable for everybody. I think there's a couple of questions. One is, what's the baseline? Where do you start? And I think that goes to Councilmember DiMichele's question. And then the second is, what's the formula going forward? And I think those are two separate issues. So I think we can work on a formula that says whatever we set the baseline at, this is the formula we use going forward. It can have an inflation component, it can have a population component. If we want to get really interesting, we can talk about communities of need and how we weight that. But I'd like to see something come back and say, here's the formula and here's why we think it's the right formula and here's how it fits in. In terms of the baseline, I don't think we'll ever have enough. I mean, that's the beauty of this line of work. We all know that. If you spend any time in it, you know you're never going to have enough. What's interesting is when, I think it was Ava who proposed, I think in 15 or something, that it be established based on a per capita basis, and it was $10 per capita, and now we're 12.5. So that's a 25% increase in the per capita thing. So we have escalated it. So I don't know what that number is, but I'd like to have some basis for that number other than we don't have enough. So to Councilmember DiMichele's point, if we could say, you know, we expect a 10% increase in wages in the human services field, and we think rent's going to be going like this, but something that we can tie our star to and say is based on something other than it's just a number. So give me a baseline and make that baseline based on something, and it's a baseline, and then propose some factors that we can use going forward. So cost of living, you know, needs of the community, whatever those factors are that we think should escalate it over time. And I think that would be really helpful and give us something we could just hang on to.
So I have a question. What's the human services budget in 2022?
For human services grants?
Yes.
It's $500,000.
So it's $500,000 today.
Yes. Today we have $500,000.
But this proposal would hold it at $500,000 through 2024 and then start a CPI?
Not necessary. That's up to you and your feedback. With city Administrator Bobkowitz's permission, depending on your discussion during the budget process, if you decide you have funds for that, that could be added to 2023, 2024.
City Administrator?
Yes, thank you, Chair Marks. The administration has no objection of applying it right now. I think we wanted, as Mr. Grella said, to let the council have a discussion with that. But, you know, we feel very comfortable with the formula. I think Council Member Ray's comments are very well taken, and we have discussed them in his absence internally. And that's why you do not see a different kind of more aggressive factor, because we still believe we need more data. We think that there is certainly the justification for the 500,000 right now. We think that the cost of living escalation makes sense. Our sense is that it needs to go up even higher, but we do not have the data to present to you. So rather than say, give us another year, we're here tonight with a more action-related proposal with the understanding that this work will continue. And I would imagine a year from now, we'll be able to come with perhaps even a different formula based on more data.
So I see your hand up, Barb, but let me finish my thought, and then I'll come back to you. I guess what my thinking is that if we said, yeah, it's 500,000 this year, it's 500,000 plus, I would just do the CPI accelerator. I think that would square the circle between both of the things that I'm hearing, because it would address Councilmember DiMichelle's concern that we need to get ahead of inflation, or at least keep up with inflation right now. And it would also start with a number, and then I'm very comfortable with CPI plus and then per capita as well. That's long been my standard for expenditures, and we have seen just this week in Seattle, when expenditures over the long haul greatly exceed that relationship, you start to see drastic concerns around general fund shortages, like they're facing $120 million this year, right? But I mean, we avoid that by having smart accelerators like this. Now, I will call on Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you, Chair Martz. I think the thrust of what I was trying to say is exactly what both you and Councilmember Ray are discussing, and City Administrator Bobkowitz. And that is, I would really like to see us accelerate this and make sure that the baseline starting in 23, 24 is reflective of the pressures that are on our social service agencies. And so Councilmember Ray's remarks are well taken. I also like your proposal, so I think we can go forward and come up with a proposal to bring back to the committee or back to the council for consideration.
I mean, I'd like the three of us, if we can, to agree this evening to what proposal we'd like to bring back to the full council. I mean, how do you feel about saying this year is what it is, and for next year we go with the CPI accelerator?
Oh, I'm all over that. I actually was surprised that it wasn't that way. When I was looking at the numbers, I thought that's what we were going to have, was the 543 or whatever that number is. So I think that makes perfect sense to me. But I would like to continue doing some digging in the future, but I think for a going forward plan, that works.
And I know Councilmember DiMichele, you'd really like to see a transformative view on how we do grant funding. And I think starting with this today, and then understanding that there's a sense of the body that we would love to see more data that would allow for a conversation about a transformational model, I think would reflect the will of the three of us.
I agree, and I appreciate the conversation. As City Administrator Bobkowitz indicated, we may come across more data that gives us a better look at it. But I think if we're in agreement that we need to do something much more immediately, then I'm fine with the discussion right now. Yeah.
So it sounds like the three of us agree. Next year would be 500,000 plus with the implementation immediately for 2023 of the CPI accelerator and per capita. Right? All right. You have,
I'm sorry.
City Administrator, you have a quizzical look.
I do, the per capita piece. So is that then changing the base?
Well, if we get 10% more people between now and next year, 500,000 plus CPI isn't enough, right? You know, if you get more people, historically, we've had, you know, we went with a dollar per resident, with the idea being that as our city gets bigger, we need more services. I think taking this year as the starting bogey, but saying that next year it's both CPI and population was what you're hearing from this body.
So I think it was mentioned that we're at $12 per head.
We are $12 per head, and if I understand correctly, Chair Martz, and what you're proposing is that we would add a population growth percentage. So, for example, for us that would be a 0.7%. Yes.
Okay. So there's two factors versus just
The
one.
CPI.
The CPI plus population
growth, yes.
Just want to make sure we're on the same
such
page.
that the per capita investiture in real dollars stays at least constant to keep up with inflation.
Susie Monsell is watching at home and already texting me, so I want to be sure that we are clear. And while I mentioned Susie, she corrected me. The annual monies that we're collecting are not 800,000, but 1,800,000. So my apologies.
The 1/2 of 1%?
Yeah, the 1/10 of 1%.
Sorry, 1/10 of 1%.
Is 1,800,000 per year. So I knew the 800,000 was stuck in my head, but it's 1,800,000. So thank you, Susie. There's other things to watch on television tonight.
All right. The next question is the committee supportive of piloting the emergency housing model proposed as a targeted investment? Councilmember Ray.
I can start this one. I am of multiple minds on this one. I have this belief when you have a disconnect with somebody, it's generally because you're talking about different things. And so I don't dispute the need. I don't dispute that we're a caring community. I don't dispute that we want to do better and that people need services and shelter. What I'm really struggling with is what's the best and most effective way to do that. And I haven't been convinced tonight that the city of Issaquah is more capable of providing shelter than is the King County Seattle Cooperative organization. We're talking $700,000. I did some quick numbers. It looks like $100 million that the county is, KCRHA is spending. So I'm not opposed to doing a pilot, but I need to have some confidence at the end of a pilot that you can prove to me that this is better than what KCRHA could do, and in very tangible terms. And then I wrestle with, if we can serve this population, are we just moving the problem around? And so I will support the pilot because I think, I like trying things and seeing how they work. But when the pilot's done, I have a really high bar that I want you to get over to convince me that this was the best use of that $700,000, because there's a lot of stuff we could do with a lot of people in need that we could address with $700,000. So you got to convince me that this is the absolute best way to do it compared to what other providers could do. So that's kind of where I'm at on this. It's a compelling argument for sure, but I'm from Missouri. Show me.
Thank you. Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you so much, Chair Martz. So let me start by saying that when the council voted to capture that 1/10 of 1% sales tax, this was the proposal that's in front of us tonight was pretty much the dream that I had at that point. And the proposal that's been brought forward is actually more elegant than even the one I envisioned. I think that the reason that this was my dream might answer Councilmember Ray's thoughts about how can we do it better, or why will this be better? And the why it will be better is because it is here in Issaquah. And there is a mountain of research that shows that when people are homeless, if you can keep them in their community and keep them with their connections and keep them close to where they are currently operating, and as one of our commentators pointed out, some of them actually have jobs here in Issaquah and they're still homeless. The ability to continue those contexts and that sense of community. And so you could ask the question, I think, well, you know, do homeless people have connections in the community? And the one illustration that I can give you is the night that I did my ride-along with the Issaquah Police Department officer. And part of that, we walked around downtown and she made contact with homeless person after homeless person after homeless person. And even that small amount of contact makes a huge difference. And then we have the Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank and Aaron and the wonderful people that are there that provide community for people in homelessness. And then we have Friends of Youth that provides contacts. And so to force people to go to Bellevue or to go to Seattle or to go to Kirkland and take them out of whatever community context they have is just adding another level of trauma to what is already a traumatic situation. So in that sense, just by providing a place here, we are doing better than the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. And Alexis and Mallory, I have huge, I am not at all dissing that program because Alexis and Mallory have been wonderful partners for a lot of our discussions. But there is just nothing that takes the place of providing residents, as Doug said, a place to lay your head that is in your own community. And so just by doing that, we are doing it better than the regional network can do. I really commend Monica and Alexis and the city administration for coming up with what, again, I will call a very elegant proposal for us to consider, and I fully support it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. I absolutely agree with Councilmember Ray that at the end of this pilot, we'll want to take a really, should the full council support it, we'll want to take a really good look at the effects of it. I mean, we are one city, not a particularly big city, in a big county, and seeing how this service impacts our own community and adjacent communities, I think will be part of that conversation. Additionally, how other cities address this, how Bellevue addresses it, and Snoqualmie and so forth. However, I have cause to be optimistic, and there's a couple of things. One is that the unit cost is proportional to the number that I've heard for a long time, which it's staggering, but $50,000 per person per year is the number that has been talked about in King County for several years now. This is more or less right around that number. So that tells me that at least as a proposal that it projects out as something comparable to King County. And there's another argument to me, which is, and it kind of relates to something that Councilmember DiMichele said, you know, with public safety, we have identified for quite some time that having the interlocking pieces of dispatch, IPD, jail, court is extremely valuable in responding to public safety. I think commensurately on the housing side, when dealing with unsheltered folks and trying to help them bridge their situation, IPD, behavioral health coordinator, emergency housing, and then the private services like Issaquah Food and Clothing Bank, I have a hope that will have a similar, those interlocking pieces will have a similar ability for us to respond more comprehensively. But I'm completely with you, Councilmember Ray. You know, there will be a natural feeling if this 1/10 of 1% is bringing in $1,800,000, there will be, and if this program is even moderately successful, there will be people wanting to consider using a larger fraction of that, and that's where saying, hey, how has this worked will be really, really important. So I think we have 3 thumbs up on that one. Yep. All right. Then we have, would the committee like to recommend the administration consider something different? What types of information would be helpful for the administration to bring back to the committee regarding the items proposed? Any additional comments or direction we want to consider?
Not for me.
Virginia Michelle?
No, I think we've talked about the type of information that would be helpful. I don't know if City Administrator Bob Kowitz would like us to define that a little bit better, but I don't have anything different for us to consider. But I would like to know if we need to define the type of information we're looking for a little bit better.
How about it, City Administrator? Any further clarity you're looking for from us this evening?
Councilmember March, members of the committee, I think we're good for tonight. What we would like now, I think, with the committee's concurrence is to continue to work on this project. I think we need also to decide if this is something that you'll report out to the council as part of just a good of the order or council member reports, because if that's sufficient, what we'll do is we'll move forward. This will be included in the administration's proposed budget for next year. And I think we can come back to the committee either late in the year or at the very beginning of next year, as we're hopefully then about to implement, and say this is how the framework we're looking to track the data. We already collect a lot of data, and I think it's not going to be too hard to add additional data points to complement the data we're already collecting. We already have a dashboard that we share with the community. We can add some of those points. So I think at this point we're good with the commitment that we'll come back either at the end of the year or the first of 23 to talk.
Well, I will certainly look forward to when you and the mayor and Council President Walsh and Deputy Council President Hall figure out the budget process for this upcoming year. With that, we have one item left this evening, ID 1162, Tenant and Landlord Protection Options. This will also be presented by Ms. Negrilla, as well as Hannah Roberts, Human Services Coordinator.
Hello, thank you so much, Chair Marks. Oh, I have feedback.
Do you have your audio on your laptop?
I have it. Give me a moment.
Close the mic. I'm sorry. No, it was working so long.
I think we should be good now.
Yes.
Yes, I apologize for that. Give me just a moment to open my other presentation and share it. While I do that, oh, I'm good, thank you. Yes, I'm okay. Thank you so much. That's very, very nice. So for this item, I have the pleasure to have with me Hannah Roberts, our Human Services Coordinator, who's gonna present with me tonight. And so for this item, council members, we are gonna talk a little bit about some tenant and landlord protection options. Really, in particular, we are bringing for your consideration and seeking your direction on the tenant protection recommendations provided by ARCH, a regional coalition for housing. Back in April, we received a letter from ARCH asking mayors and councils to consider some of the recommendations set forth to consider some protections for tenants. And so for you tonight, our questions that we are proposing to you are specifically, one, as a committee, are you supportive of our recommendations, the administration's recommendations? Or would you like to recommend that the city take action and adopts the recommendations for tenant protections provided by ARCH? Alternatively, would you like to propose something different or take no action at this time? And I'm gonna dive deeper just a little bit to explain a high-level overview of what the recommendations were by Arch, and then I would like to hand it over to Hannah to tell you and talk to you a little bit deeper about the outreach that we conducted and the information that we tried to gather in making our recommendations. So Arch in their recommendations proposed that we as a city consider three actions. One, to require landlords to provide a minimum of 120 days or 180 days notice when for rent increases. A second one regarding late fees, and that was the recommendation was to establish a cap on late fees for late rental payments, and that cap should be maintained at 1.5% of the tenant's monthly rent. And then the third recommendation was to really establish a cap on moving costs, such as security deposits and whatnot, and those should not be more than the equivalent of 1 month's rent, and also to allow tenants to pay these in installments. And so once we received that letter on our end, we started conducting outreach to landlords and tenants in Issaquah to really get their feedback and recommendations. And we also did some research to see what other cities in the region, especially on the east side, are doing. And so with that, I would like to invite Hannah. She did an outstanding job with talking with several landlords and tenants, and I would like to invite her to tell us her findings. Hannah, welcome.
Hi, Monica. Thank you so much, and good evening, council members. Hannah Roberts here, Human Services Coordinator. Like Monica said, I will be presenting this evening on what we found through our engagement and outreach with Issaquah landlords and tenants. So to note, we started off with talking to our landlords in Issaquah. I reached out to 26 Issaquah landlords and received feedback and responses from 22 of those apartment complexes. Of those 22 units, I think it's worth noting that all 22 properties had properties outside of Issaquah in addition to their Issaquah properties. Also worth noting that these properties that we interviewed, 64% of them did not have any available units, and the ones that did have available units had about 1 or 2 that they expected to fill in shortly. I think that really speaks to the just the high demand and low supply that we are also hearing and seeing in Issaquah. And really what we wanted to do in talking to our landlords, we wanted to understand what's their process, what's their financial situations that they provide for tenants. So in looking at the average move-in cost, what we commonly heard from landlords was that they were $45 application fees non-refundable. There was a $250 non-refundable admin fee, and then $250 refundable deposit. And again, that was a very common average that we did hear. In regards to late fees, the range that we heard was between $25 and $125 for a one-time late fee. But really commonly, an average we heard was $75 fee. And per state Washington law, that the landlords all did report providing a 14-day notice with a payment plan option. And I think it's also worth noting that a lot of the landlords discuss this in detail of how they do want to be trying to be accommodating to tenants and their certain circumstances. And in addition, we found that the average rent increase, it really did range between 3% and 15%. We even had one complex report that their increase was up to 20%. But on average, we did see the 10% mark was pretty common. And they landlords indicated that that was determined by market rate, which essentially is what are other apartment complexes going for? What is the availability and what is the demand? It's also worth noting here that the rent increases did occur. Of those 22 apartment complexes, 77% have implemented increases, and that the ones that have not yet do intend to by the end of the year. So it is a common theme that we are seeing. Issaquah landlords' concerns. A few things that we noted here was the increase of operation costs. So just like tenants, landlords have been affected by inflation. So operation costs, for example, a landlord reported a 60% increase in insurance costs, 30% increase in real estate taxes in the last 2 years. And so that was a common theme in addition to any general operation cost of maintenance. Those costs have seen a significant increase. So that's a major concern of the landlords, as well as landlords reported seeing an increase in tenant social service needs. So they're seeing more crisis that their tenants were experiencing, not just with financial aid needs, but with behavioral health or medical issues, employment issues. And so recognizing they needed to provide additional information of resources that their tenants could use outside of just financial aid. And then also they recognize that tenants really need to have been struggling resetting their payment patterns and understanding that they have not seen late fees or rent increases in 2 years. And so that really is taking some time for tenants to readjust to these patterns. And then the biggest and last part of the recommendation that we received from landlords and the needs was just consistency across the King County. So any amendments, any changes to policies should be across the same across the board. Now, speaking to tenants, we really wanted to engage with our residents who are renting in Issaquah. And so what we did was we conducted an online survey, and we received 49 responses in addition to additional conversations and email correspondence. And it's worth noting that of those 49 responses, 71% were behind in their rent in the last 2 years and utilized rental assistance. Up to $5,000 was the common amount that was assisted. The main issue and concerns that tenants were experiencing were essentially costs. So rent increases, late fees, anything that would increase the cost. And the majority saw an up to $150 in rent increase. And I think it's worth noting that we had a couple of residents report over $800 in rent increase. And then ultimately the trends that we saw within our tenant and tenant engagement was this ongoing need for financial assistance. So what this means is that we saw tenants needing on a month-to-month basis additional financial assistance. Now, our community partners are typically looking and provide once or twice a year for emergency needs, but really the need has increased significantly. And then also we heard that a lot of tenants are either because of the hike of rental prices are being forced to move out of the area. So if they received a rent increase that they cannot afford, they start looking, okay, where else can I afford in Issaquah? And they're finding that those prices are more expensive. Therefore, they're having to leave the area entirely. And the last thing here is that the rent to income ratio is unrealistic. They are finding that a lot of landlords are requiring the gross income to be 3 times the rent. So the average rental is about $2,500. So having a gross income of $90,000 is what's expected. And that can be very challenging for a single income household. So also, in addition to talking to our landlords and our tenants in Issaquah, we wanted to see what other jurisdictions are doing. You can see here Auburn, Kenmore, Seattle, unincorporated King County. Those cities have implemented similar arch tenant protection policies. And as far as East Side cities, there are no immediate plans or actions. We do have Kirkland and Redmond who will be meeting in July for further discussion. So that concludes my portion, and I'll pass it back to Monica for a summary and our recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Well done. Council members, as you heard from Hannah, I think the needs are dire on both ends. So on one end, landlords have their own huge challenges. They have their own increases in costs for operations. They've been impacted by the pandemic over the last couple of years as well. And also, it's worth to notice that many of them, I believe about 80% of the landlords that we talked with, they have also properties in other cities, which makes it really, really challenging when we consider just citywide policies. Because if you have properties in 4 cities and you need to keep track of those 4 cities, it makes it challenging, right? On the tenant side, of course, it's heartbreaking. I think the biggest finding is that really tenants need financial assistance now on a regular basis. So our rental assistance programs are really set up for emergency situations. Maybe somebody, they have a medical need or something unusual happens and they need financial assistance once or twice a year. But what we hear is that people need now consistent emergency financial assistance in order just to make rent right now. That is concerning. And then when we start discussing about just providing more time when rent increase comes, it just doesn't come across as genuine in really making a difference in really supporting them or helping them, right? And so that's why tenants really need more support that's more impactful now than what we see in the recommendations. And so because of that, really in us trying to put our thinking hat on, we would like to recommend that perhaps council at the ARCH organization level considers and continues to brainstorm with other cities to see if there's something that can be done jointly with other cities, but more so, it may be worth considering looking at state and federal advocacy and trying to look for options that really are more impactful. One example that comes to mind, and that's just from my experience in the past with tenants who are on SSI or SSDI, right? They are on fixed incomes for multiple years, and they can't keep up with the rent increases. And so that's at federal level, something that's decided, and those increases are really happening every 10 years or so. Could we do something to where we join other cities, other regional efforts, and really try to advocate for more systemic changes that tend to be more impactful, other than just providing tenants with more time, when right now more time does not help them, as you heard Hannah. If they want to look for other places to rent, there's nothing more affordable that they could find in Issaquah. So are we really helping them by implementing the measures? So that's where we are coming from when we make our recommendations. And so with that, I think council members, the options tonight, you can, if you would like to support our recommendations, or if you would like to consider recommending that the city takes action to adopt the recommendations proposed by ARCH, or you can perhaps guide us to consider something else or take no action. Would love to hear from you. Thank you so much.
First up, I'll ask if there's any questions, not from Councilmember Ray. Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you, Chair Martz. When you surveyed the landlords, were any of the landlords that you surveyed, what we call mom and pop, one house or maybe a couple of units, or were those all larger landlords? You mentioned that they have multiple properties, so I'm just wondering what the demographic of those that you surveyed was.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Councilmember D. Michelle. They were not mom and pop type of shops or single residents. They were larger units. They were all Arch apartments, were included in that. I could also provide a list if you needed to. But then there was 15 that offered affordable housing options, and then a few who did not offer affordable housing.
So to follow up, I guess it was my understanding that what Arch is proposing is that these proposed ordinances or regulations would be across the board. And maybe I'm misunderstanding. Are they actually asking us to adopt these just for Arch properties?
No, it really would be across the board from my understanding.
Okay.
And Monica can correct me if I'm wrong, but yes, I believe it's for across the board. So it would affect not just low income housing, but
everyone.
Everyone in Fort Market.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
No other questions at this time. I am going to take public comment, but before I do that, I want to share the public comment that we've received on this issue. There really wasn't, there was some from the earlier, but there wasn't, it wasn't contentious. This was quite contentious, public input. One public feedback was Arch proposal doesn't address low and moderate income housing. It usurps the legislative process. More regulations are an increasing burden on landlords. It would be better to provide more transit, on-street parking, micro-unit development code. Another feedback was hard to predict rent 6 months out. Another was reject the administrative recommendation. Instead, provide more safeguards, including eviction protection and guaranteed legal counsel. Another was don't follow in Seattle's footsteps. It's a supply and demand problem, not a policy problem. Another was don't enact rent control. Don't be Seattle. Another was provide more renter safeguards. Another was more renter protections. Another was pass the Arch recommendations. So quite a bit of different feedback, including from some organizations that represent federations of landlords, and others were major landlords in the valley. So that was the feedback. Now I will ask if there's any public comment. If anybody is interested in providing public comment on this issue this evening, either here with us or online. I see at least one person here, so let's start with here in the room. So if you'll come up and give your name, address, and your relationship to the city, please. And then you have 5 minutes.
Julian Midlow. I live on Squawk Mountain. Been here for quite some time. I sent in a written comment proposing that the City Council would reject the administration's request to send this up to a regional basis. I just don't think we have the time for that now. We have a lot of cost of living escalations. I hear that in my position all the time. People are struggling with the cost of living increases, especially when it comes to gasoline and a variety of other things in their lives that are really escalating. And so I think we need to make sure that we put these steps into place, even though it doesn't have as much protection as I would like it to have. I think we do need to consider legal representation and just cause eviction ordinance as well, because those are just really important things in my opinion, and we should go beyond that. But at least we should put this stuff first on the table and just give the barest of notice for people. And just putting it to a regional basis is just another delay, in my opinion. Let's consider putting, King County or something like that for legal representation, and have King County or a federation of the cities fund that. But like I said, let's just pass this now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here in the room want to give comment this evening before we see if there's anybody online? Clerk, do we have anyone online wishing to speak to this issue before we deliberate?
Yes, Chair Martz. Guillermo Rivera would like to speak to this topic. Guillermo, I have made you a panelist. You should see the option to unmute, and you can turn on your video.
I think I already unmute myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you, City Administrator and members of the Council. My name is Guillermo Rivera, and I'm with East Side for All. East Side for All is a racial equity and social justice organization based in East King County. BICOP communities in the East Side have been invisible for many years in the decision-making process, even as BICOP communities have been increasing exponentially on the East Side. It's time to hear from everyone that is part of our communities. I'm here to talk in favor of the ARCH recommendation regarding tenant protections. Communities in the East Side, and especially in Issaquah and other cities, will be benefit with this. We have been hearing from communities how hard it is to buy houses and how hard it is to rent houses. You hear it from Hannah just a minute ago. So people will continue renting houses for many years to come. And right now, we know that people have to move out of the city, like Hannah and Monica were saying, right? Because the rent increases and because probably they receive a very short notice of rent increase. If you get 120 days to the people, that will benefit because they can plan for what they have to do in order to pay their rent. Families, they want to live where they work. Where they go to worship, where they get their kids to school, and measure like these ones recommended in the ARCH letter will allow people to continue living in Issaquah. Keep in mind that also these measures don't benefit everyone, not only people of low income. Every single family, regardless their income, wants to have more time when rent increases happen and prepare for their future with dignity and respect. These recommendations are common sense and will allow renters on Issaquah to have a play field. And I mean, this will not increase operation costs for anyone and will help landlords to have policy consistency. You mentioned it's better to have landlords that have buildings in different cities. Let's make Issaquah the first city to take this. I know that in Kirkland and in Redmond, they're having discussions. Monica mentioned it in July. So let's make Issaquah the first city to change this. So I ask you to consider and approve the ARCH recommendations. And I know also that more protections are needed along with actions to make rent more affordable. But this is the person that was before me say, I think it's a very good first step. I appreciate your time. I want to thank you for the work that you are doing with Equity Lens in Issaquah. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment. Clerk, do we have anyone else wishing to speak virtually?
Chair Martz, there are no other virtual hands raised at this time.
I'll ask one more time in the room. Not seeing anybody. Let's move to deliberation, and I'll start with actually Councilmember Ray.
Thank you, Councilmember Martz. This is a tough one. This is we've got the tough ones lined up today because there's no easy answers, and I am struck by a couple of things. One is, regardless of whether or not we adopt the ARCH proposal, the rent's going to be driven by market forces. And right now we have a huge demand for rental spaces, and we have low supply. If I remember my economics class very well, when that happens, you see prices escalate, and that's exactly what we're seeing. My concern is if we go and make changes to how we manage our rental properties in Issaquah it will create an imbalance, and cities that are near us that don't have that imbalance will attract more rental properties, and the price of rental properties in Issaquah will probably escalate, not reduce. So we're not talking about rent controls here. We're not even talking, we're not talking about locking down rents, because that's not proposed. I believe that the best course of action here is actually a regional approach or a state approach, where we have a consistent set of policies implemented across the region, so we don't see the migration of new rental properties, new rental stock moving to other parts of the region. So I am supportive of the administration's approach or proposal to pursue regional, state, and federal policies to help address this absolutely significant problem.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Thank you. Arch proposed 3 different items, and I'm wondering if we could take those one at a time, because I have different takes on each one of those. I don't know if we have a summary of those somewhere. There it is. One thing I did want to note, I am here at the Association of Washington Cities in beautiful downtown Vancouver, and I did have a conversation with Newcastle City Council member this afternoon, and he indicated that Newcastle did take up this issue last night at their council meeting, so we might want to check in with them. So it is being discussed at a regional level by several cities, but as you pointed out, no action has been taken by anyone yet. I really want to talk about the first one, the longer notices of rent increases, and Guillermo really articulated well my concerns there. Of all of the recommendations, this is the one that I feel, and I know that the people that you surveyed said that it wouldn't help all that much. You may not know this, but for the first 25 years that I was in Issaquah, I was a renter, and I was in a situation where, and I won't go into detail, it's too long of a story, but where everybody in our complex was asked to move, and we were given 2 weeks notice to leave. I looked it up, and the state of Washington has on the books a requirement of a 30-day notice at this point. And just having been in that situation, here are some of the things that happen when you're told that there's going to be a rent increase, and you realize that you're not going to be able to afford that, or for whatever other reason you're going to have to move. First of all, you have to start looking for another place, and as was noted in the remarks, it's probably going to be very difficult to find a place in Issaquah that you can rent at the same rent that you've been paying up until the increased notice occurs. But you have to start that search. If you have children in the family and you're in school and you have only 30 days and you can't find a place in Issaquah, you may not only have to move your children out of that school, you may have to move them to a whole new district, wherever it is that you find a living space. It could affect your employment, especially if you're a worker who works right here in Issaquah and now you have to move away. Are you going to have to give up your job? Are you going to have to find another job? There's the moving costs, and if you are struggling with rent, how are you going to pay for an expensive move with notification of only 30 days? And there are a host of other things that you have to face. I look at the first item and I think we are not asking landlords to forego rent increases. We are not trying to control rents. We are simply asking landlords to consider and have some consideration and to plan ahead, to give people ample notice that there will be a rent increase, and then those renters can decide whether they can live with that rent increase or not. Some of them will decide that they can live with it. And then those who cannot, who look at their income and realize that they're not going to be able to afford that rent anymore, all we're asking is that they have ample time to do all of the things that it takes to make a major move into another location, which may be miles and miles and miles away, depending on where they can find affordable housing. So I think that it's a reasonable thing to ask. The 6-month time, the 180 days, may be something that is too onerous for most landlords, but 120 days, 120 days, I think would be very reasonable. And some people, if they have to move, are not even going to take that whole 4 months. So I honestly don't understand why that would be a burdensome request of landlords. They would simply have to plan ahead when they're going to make a rent increase and give the people who are renting their households an opportunity to do all of the things that it takes to make a major move, especially if there are children in the family. So I would really like to see us move forward with the first proposal. Thank you.
The first element of the ARCH proposal.
Yes.
Okay. So this is a tough one. I'm going to echo Chris. You know, workforce housing has been one of my 2 highest priorities since the day I joined council a while ago, and we've had some successes and some lack of successes in getting more workforce housing. You know, I actually think hearing $2,500 for an 1,100 square foot apartment requiring 90K qualifying. 90K qualifying is 80% of AMI for a 3 to 4 person family. So that actually tells me that the average apartment in Issaquah is actually targeting 80 to 90% of AMI, which is not terrible, and I would argue a lot better than where we were 10 years ago, which is not to say Issaquah is more affordable in general. It's less affordable. But you know, the picture on workforce housing here in our community is complicated. We've built a lot of market rate in the valley, but you know, I grew up in a 750 square foot 2-bedroom apartment, and a 750 square foot apartment in Issaquah is a lot more affordable than you know, than a 1,500 square foot or 1,300 square foot brand new, you know, 3-bedroom 2-bath apartment in Issaquah. So it's all complicated, and none of it has to do with this ARCH proposal. I really struggle. You know, ARCH's mission is to preserve and increase the supply of housing for low and moderate income households. None of these 3 things have anything to do with that. So I think both, I guess where I'm coming from is I think both the pros and cons, generally speaking, of the ARCH proposal are overstated. The pros and the benefit to the community are overstated, and the cons and the fears of you know, disparate housing environment by landlords. I don't see a lot to this. I do think if you want to say as general pieces of policy, I like Councilmember DeMichel's looking at these 3 planks. I think there's probably something there in an environment where housing prices are escalating. There's probably a public policy role for having something more than 30 days notice. So I sort of want to ask my 2 fellow council members whether we might recommend the administration come back at a future date with a proposal around 90 or 120 days specific, something that they could talk to the local landlord community about and folks in the community. It's a much more modest proposal than what some folks would hope for, but I think it's probably something separate from affordable housing. It's probably something we could consider or should consider doing as a council. So, Councilmember Ray?
I'm not opposed to longer notifications. I'm not opposed to 120 days and 90 days. What I am opposed is Issaquah going alone. I don't want us to be the ones on an island and where we have neighbors who have different sets of rules. because as we talked about, we have landlords who have properties in multiple cities. And we have landlords or developers who are going to be contemplating where to build their next apartment complex. And they're going to say, well, I can put it in Snoqualmie, and they don't have these requirements, or I can put it in Issaquah, and they do have these requirements. I'm going to put it in Snoqualmie because I'm a market-driven business person, and I'm trying to make the best business decision. It's a market-driven thing, and what that does is it reduces the stock of rental properties in Issaquah at a time when we already stated we have lots of demand and not enough supply. So going back to Economics 101, 201, we got to supply, and we're going to see prices increase, and we're trying to not get prices to increase, right? We're trying to drive prices down. So it's counterproductive to what we want to accomplish. That being said, if we take this on regionally and we get regional concurrence that these are the regional things we want to do, then we have a balanced playing field, and then it's not a difference. And so we now compete for that same housing stock. So yeah, great idea, love it a lot. I'm all for the concept, I'm just not for the concept in Issaquah alone.
Councilmember DeMichelle, do you wish to add anything?
Remarks are well taken. I guess my question would be, if we're going to do it regionally, how are we going to do it regionally? If we spend a year trying to come up with a venue or a mechanism for doing that, are we going to go through the King County Council? Are we going to go through Eastside Human Services Forum? What's going to be the mechanism for having that regional conversation? And well, I have some other questions, but they pertain to number 2 and number 3. So just staying on the topic, do we have any ideas of how we would have that regional conversation? I guess would be my question.
Well, to put it in a form that the administration could do something with, maybe the three of us can agree that we would like to have the administration come back and understand after speaking with our county council representatives or whatever, what the best way to address this concern would be. That we're all saying at this time, we think that this element of the ARCH proposal, while not related to affordable housing, is something that we'd like to find out more about and ask our county council, right? We have a relatively new council, and they may have, this may be something that's already on their plate. The city administrator would like to.
I think Councilmember DeMichelle.
Councilmember DeMichelle.
I just want to say I agree. In some ways, I think this has been mislabeled as a renter protection. And when you look, I totally agree with you that if you look at the proposals, there really isn't a renter protection here. It does not, doesn't stop rent increases. It doesn't mandate that no late rental penalties are applied. It doesn't do any of that would make a difference. And so I want to acknowledge that the staff is also saying it in probably a more diplomatic way than what we're saying it, but this is really not a renter protection proposal in that it doesn't really do much in the way of protecting renters. So I just wanted to follow up on that comment that you made. So thank you.
Thanks. City Administrator.
Thank you, Chair Martz. All of our neighbors are having similar conversations. All of our neighbors are trying to grapple with this. I think, all thoughtful people, council members in other communities, all facing similar concerns. I think everyone is trying to sort this out. I think my suggestion to the committee would be, if you are interested in this topic, perhaps ask the administration to come back at your next meeting. We will know more. I think has been mentioned, a few communities are meeting over the next couple of weeks. Some have met, I guess, one as recently as last night. People have been calling us in Issaquah when they saw this was on the agenda. What are you doing? What are you recommending? There's just a lot of interest. So perhaps we could come back, report what other communities are thinking about. We can share with other communities that of these particular components, the longer notices is one that sort of resonates at least with a city council committee here in Issaquah, and then perhaps talk some more next month. I think it's going to be difficult to get a regional coalition going in any kind of substantive way anytime soon. I think Councilmember DiMichele is right that it's just very difficult to do that. The realities of the calendar, the summer, most of the regional bodies take time off. But I think we could come back at your July meeting and at least provide an update. And if that makes sense to talk more, we could talk more.
And I will point out that when the county wants to do something, like for instance, running a bond or a levy, they can ram it through in about 2 weeks. So if they decided they had some gumption on this issue, they could move pretty quickly. They've showed.
And I don't know that we have seen gumption.
They just
King
did
County
on
this
a levy,
particular issue.
right? They just rammed a levy through.
And absolutely, but our sister cities, I think, are all trying to be thoughtful on this topic with all the various issues that have been raised tonight. I think we'll have more information a month from now. We can share that, and we can also do, my concern on the legal notices is enforcement. That we will, I'm sure, have landlords that say, I don't care what Issaquah says, I have rights, I'm going to do what I want to do. A tenant comes to us and says, well, Issaquah, you passed an ordinance. I have a landlord who's forcing me to pay more rent. What are you going to do, Issaquah? So I would also want the city attorney's office to be able to come back and opine what their thoughts are as far as litigation against the city on whatever point a landlord or landlords may wish. And then what obligations do we have then to support Issaquah tenants if those landlords are saying, we don't care, this is what it's going to be. So we could certainly do those things to a certain degree between now and the committee's July meeting.
Councilmember DiMichele, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I appreciate City Administrator Bobkowitz's comments. I think we need more information, and we probably need more dialogue. And maybe we can contact some of our council colleagues in other cities and see where they're at. And I think maybe coming back to the committee next month would be a very excellent idea. So, yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Ray?
Absolutely.
Was your mic on?
No, absolutely.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
My mic
folks
is
at home.
absolutely on. Can I just make one comment, though? Just because the city administrator brought up kind of the legal aspects of this and where our guardrails are and what we can and can't do under state law would be also extremely important to have some insights into. So if we could get the city attorney to opine on that, that would be very helpful at the next meeting.
All right. Are we through our questions, Ms. Negrilla? Do you have everything you need from us?
I believe so. Thank you so much. I think the only, if I remember correctly, Councilmember DiMichele said that she had additional questions. I'm not sure if.
Yes, I'm sorry. Councilmember DiMichele?
Yeah, thank you for the reminder, because I forgot that I had additional questions. Hannah, when you were surveying, we always hear that thing about first and last month rent, and I didn't see on there. So in addition to the move-in costs that you were talking about, do they also have to pay first and last month's rent as they're coming in when they're renting an apartment?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. So commonly we did not hear first and last rent was required. What we did hear was that the prorated amount was required. So if they moved in mid-month, then they would owe half of the rent, for example. So actually that was not a common theme of first and last. If there was a need for first and last, it may be resulted to a low credit score or low income, but commonly in speaking to the landlords, that was not the requirement for move-in costs. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, just a piece of information that I would like to have right now. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. And that was all my questions. Chair Martins.
Thank you, council member. Well, it's 2.5. You know, your estimate was exceedingly accurate. The estimate was 2.5 hours, and those estimates have historically been quite optimistic. But we're at 2 hours 45 minutes or 2 hours 48 minutes. So good estimate on it. I just want to say this has been extraordinarily rich conversation with the public and with the administration and with each other, and I'm looking forward to this committee's continued work. Any closing comments or thoughts, Councilmember Ray?
This is completely unrelated to the topic, but very much related to the committee structure. It's a great committee. I'm really happy to have committees back. This was, I thought, a really rich conversation. I'm just excited to be part of this.
Councilmember DiMichele?
+1, I think this was a great conversation. We had a chance to really explore with each other. And I'm looking forward to our future. I'm calling it the Zippy Committee, but we'll call it SIP. So I'm looking forward to future ZIP meetings. There we go.
Any further business from the administration before we adjourn? I see none. Thank you, members of the public, and we are adjourned at 9:19.